The millionaire's 6-year-old, paralyzed and autistic son screamed non-stop in the restaurant until an orphan girl decided to act, and what she did left everyone pale. Before we unfold this journey, press like and share where you're from and your favorite life lesson. The crystal chandeliers of Le Bernardin restaurant cast dancing shadows across horrified faces as 8-year-old Marcus Wellington's screams pierced through the elegant Manhattan dining room like shards of broken glass. His wheelchair-bound body convulsed with uncontrollable fury, his small fists pounding against the titanium frame of his custom medical chair, while his autistic mind remained trapped in a world of overwhelming sensations that no amount of his father's $300 million fortune could fix. "No, too loud, too bright, make it stop." And then Marcus's voice cracked with desperation as he threw his head back, tears streaming down his flushed cheeks. The horrific car accident 2 years ago had stolen his legs forever, but autism had stolen so much more. His peace, his comfort, his ability to exist in a world that felt like constant torture, and worst of all, his father's fading hope for any semblance of a normal life. Richard Wellington, 52 years old and one of Manhattan's most successful real estate moguls, stood helpless beside his son's wheelchair, his perfectly tailored Italian suit now wrinkled and damp with sweat from his desperate failed attempts to calm the boy. Beads of perspiration rolled down his forehead as every single patron in the five-star restaurant turned to stare with a mixture of pity, disgust, and morbid fascination. Some brazenly filmed the heartbreaking scene with their phones, already composing social media posts about the spoiled rich kid having a meltdown, while others whispered harsh judgments behind manicured hands, their voices carrying cruel assumptions about bad parenting and lack of discipline. The maître d', a thin man in his 60s who had worked at Le Bernardin for over 20 years, approached with obvious reluctance, his polished shoes clicking nervously on the marble floor. "Sir, perhaps you should consider taking your son somewhere more appropriate for his condition," he suggested, with barely concealed disgust, gesturing toward the exit as if Marcus were some kind of dangerous animal that needed to be removed from civilized society. Richard's steel-grey eyes flashed with a cold fury that had made him legendary in boardroom negotiations. "My son has every right to be here," he said through gritted teeth, but even as he spoke the words, he felt the familiar crushing weight of helplessness that had haunted him since Marcus's diagnosis 3 years earlier. Every specialist, every therapy session, every experimental treatment costing hundreds of thousands of dollars had yielded the same devastating result. Nothing worked, nothing helped, nothing could reach his tormented child. That's when 7-year-old Emma Rodriguez appeared like a ghost, slipping silently away from the restaurant's bustling kitchen, where her current guardian, Mrs. Patterson, had brought her to watch as punishment for some imagined transgression. Her worn sneakers, held together with duct tape and prayers, made absolutely no sound on the polished marble floor as she approached the chaos with the fearless determination of someone who had already lost everything that mattered and therefore had nothing left to fear. Emma had been trapped in the foster care system for 3 long years now, ever since the devastating car accident that had stolen her parents and her beloved little brother Tommy in one horrific instant. She'd bounced between 7 different foster homes, learning to read people's pain and desperation like a survival skill, developing an almost supernatural ability to understand suffering because it had become the only constant in her young life. "I can help him," she whispered, her small voice somehow cutting through Marcus's anguished screams like a knife through silk. The entire restaurant fell into stunned silence, 200 eyes fixed in amazement on this tiny girl in second-hand clothes who dared to approach the millionaire's tormented son when trained professionals had failed for years. Richard's face went completely pale, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly like a fish gasping for air. "Little girl, "You don't understand what you're dealing with," he began, but something in Emma's dark, knowing eyes stopped him cold. An ancient wisdom that seemed impossible in someone so young, a depth of understanding that spoke of unimaginable loss and hard-won knowledge about human suffering. Emma's small fingertips barely grazed Marcus's trembling hand before something absolutely extraordinary happened that would haunt the witnesses for the rest of their lives. The screaming stopped. Not gradually, not slowly, but instantly and completely, as if someone had flipped a switch in the boy's tortured mind and suddenly restored peace to his chaotic world. "The colors are too sharp in here, aren't they?" Emma whispered, her voice gentle but filled with absolute certainty as she settled gracefully onto the cold marble floor beside Marcus's wheelchair, completely ignoring the shocked gasps and whispered conversations erupting around them. "And the sounds are like broken glass cutting through your head, making everything hurt so bad you can't even think straight." Marcus's wide blue eyes, still wet with tears of frustration and pain, locked onto hers with an expression of pure wonder and recognition. For the first time in his 8 years of life, someone had described his internal world with perfect accuracy. Not the dozens of high-priced specialists his father had hired from Johns Hopkins and Mayo Clinic, not the army of therapists who spoke in clinical terms he couldn't understand, not even his beloved father, who tried so desperately to help but could never truly comprehend the sensory hell that Marcus lived in every single day. Richard stood frozen in disbelief, his heart hammering against his ribs as he watched his son's face transform from anguish to wonder, from despair to something that looked almost like hope. In 3 years of specialists and experimental treatments costing hundreds of thousands of dollars, flying to Switzerland for cutting-edge therapy and hiring the world's leading autism experts, no one had achieved what this orphan child managed in less than 30 seconds. "How did you know that? Did you?" Marcus whispered, his voice small and wondering, the first coherent sentence he'd spoken in public since the accident that had changed everything. "Nobody else ever knew what it felt like inside my head." Emma's expression grew soft and sad, her dark eyes reflecting memories of another time, another child who had struggled with the same overwhelming sensations. "My little brother Tommy was exactly like you," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying to every corner of the now silent restaurant. "Before the car accident took him and Mama and Daddy away from me forever, Tommy used to say that the world was too much, too everything, too loud and bright and scary, like living inside a tornado that never stopped spinning." The revelation hit Richard like a physical blow to the chest, stealing his breath and making his knees weak with emotion. This child, this remarkable little girl, who couldn't be more than 7 years old, had lost her entire family but was here using her devastating pain to heal his son's suffering. She understood Marcus not because of training or education, but because she had loved someone who lived in the same frightening sensory world. Marcus's breathing gradually steadied as Emma began humming a melody so soft it was barely audible. A lullaby that seemed to wrap around them like a protective bubble, blocking out the harsh sounds and overwhelming stimuli that normally sent him into screaming fits. His fingers, which had been clawing desperately at his wheelchair's armrests, slowly relaxed as the music washed over him like warm water, soothing the raw edges of his hypersensitive nervous system. "The song makes a magic bubble around all the scary sounds," Emma explained to Marcus, though her eyes never left his face, completely focused on his needs while ignoring the growing crowd of amazed onlookers. "Can you feel it working? The invisible bubble where only good, safe things are allowed to come in and touch your heart." For the first time in 2 years, not since before the accident that had paralyzed his legs and shattered his family's world, Marcus smiled. Not the forced, painful expressions that therapists had tried to teach him through behavioral modification, not the fake smiles he sometimes managed for his father's sake, but a real, genuine, joy-filled smile that lit up his entire face and brought tears to Richard's eyes. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its collective breath, 200 strangers witnessing something miraculous unfold before their eyes, a moment of pure human connection that transcended wealth and status and circumstance. The Wellington Mansion's state-of-the-art security system captured every moment in high definition, as Richard's black Bentley Continental glided through the imposing iron gates 3 hours later, the luxury vehicle's whisper-quiet engine a stark contrast to the emotional storm raging in Richard's heart. Emma sat in the back seat like a tiny princess, her small frame completely dwarfed by the hand-stitched leather interior that cost more than most people earned in a year, still humming that miraculous melody that had somehow unlocked his son's imprisoned spirit. She had never seen a house this magnificent. The Wellington estate was larger than the last 5 foster homes combined, with perfectly manicured grounds that stretched as far as her eyes could see. "Mr. Wellington," Emma said quietly as they stopped in the circular driveway beneath the mansion's towering columns, her voice filled with the learned caution of a child who had experienced too many broken promises. "I can't stay very long, Mrs. Patterson gets real angry when I'm late for my chores, and when she gets angry, bad things happen to kids like me." Richard turned in his seat to face her, his weathered face etched with emotions he hadn't felt since his beloved wife Sarah died, giving birth to Marcus 8 years ago. Hope, protectiveness, and something that felt dangerously like love for this remarkable child who had given him back his son. "Emma, what if I told you that you might not have to go back to Mrs. Patterson's house ever again? What if I told you that you could stay here with Marcus and me, that you could have your own beautiful room and all the books you could read, and never have to worry about being hungry or cold or scared again?" The words hung in the air between them like a promise too beautiful and dangerous to believe. Emma had learned through bitter experience not to hope for impossible things. Hope was the cruelest trick the adult world played on children like her, dangling dreams just long enough to make the inevitable disappointment hurt even more. But something in Richard's kind eyes looked different from all the other adults who had made promises they couldn't or wouldn't keep. Something that whispered, maybe, just maybe, this time could be different. Marcus, who hadn't spoken more than single words or desperate screams since his accident 2 years earlier, suddenly grabbed Emma's small hand with both of his as they entered the mansion's breathtaking marble foyer, his grip tight with desperate need. "Stay here with us," he whispered, the words clear and strong and filled with more emotion than Richard had heard from his son in years. "Please don't leave me alone again, Emma. Please don't let them take you away from me." Richard's carefully maintained composure finally cracked like an eggshell, tears streaming down his face as his chest tightened with overwhelming emotion. His son had just spoken his first complete heartfelt sentence in 2 years, and it was to beg this remarkable child not to abandon him to the lonely, terrifying world he'd been trapped in since the accident. The mansion's head housekeeper, Maria Santos, appeared at the top of the sweeping grand staircase like something from a fairy tale. She was a kind, motherly woman in her 50s who had helped raise Marcus since his birth, loving him like her own grandson, but even her boundless patience and affection had been unable to reach him after the trauma of losing his mother and his mobility in one devastating blow. "Papa," Marcus continued, still holding Emma's hand like a lifeline, his voice growing stronger with each word, "she makes all the bad feelings go away, just like Mama used to do before she went to heaven. Emma understands the scary things in my head, and she makes them quiet and peaceful." Richard's composure completely shattered at his son's words. His late wife, Sarah, had been the only person who could calm Marcus's autistic episodes before her tragic death during childbirth. her gentle voice and intuitive understanding creating a safe harbor in his stormy world. Now, impossibly and miraculously, a 7-year-old orphan had stepped into that sacred role, bringing light back to their desperately dark world. But as Richard reached for his phone to call his team of lawyers about emergency custody arrangements and adoption procedures, Emma's expression suddenly changed from wonder to terror. Through the mansion's massive floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see a familiar, battered pickup truck racing up the long driveway like an approaching storm, its engine backfiring and belching black smoke. "She found me," Emma whispered, all the joy draining from her face as primal fear took its place. "Mrs. Patterson found me, and now I have to go back. I have to go back to the dark place. Mrs. Dolores Patterson's weathered, furious face was twisted with rage as she stormed through the Wellington mansion's elegant front doors without invitation, her cheap polyester dress and scuffed shoes a jarring contrast to the opulent surroundings that spoke of old money and refined taste. At 65 years old and weighing nearly 300 pounds, Dolores had been running Sunshine Foster Care for 23 brutal years, and in all that time she had perfected the dark art of making unwanted children disappear into the system's deepest, most forgotten cracks, where their cries for help would never be heard. "Mr. Iron Mighty Wellington!" she barked, her harsh voice echoing off the marble walls like the crack of a whip, causing Marcus to flinch and press closer to Emma's side. "You think you can just waltz into my business and steal one of my girls without facing any consequences? Emma Rodriguez is under my legal guardianship according to state law, and she's coming back home with me right this very minute, whether she likes it or not." Emma instinctively moved protectively closer to Marcus, who tightened his desperate grip on her small hand as if he could somehow anchor her to his world through sheer force of will. The boy's hard-won calm began fracturing like thin ice as he sensed the very real danger surrounding his newfound protector, the one person who had been able to reach into his isolated world and offer him peace. "Mrs. Patterson," Richard said, his voice carefully controlled but carrying the steel-hard authority that had made him legendary in Manhattan's most ruthless business circles. "Perhaps we should discuss this situation like reasonable adults. I would very much like to explore the legal possibility of providing Emma with a more suitable living arrangement, one where her remarkable gifts could be properly nurtured and appreciated." "There's absolutely nothing to explore or discuss." Patterson snapped viciously, grabbing Emma's free arm with cruel, meaty fingers that left red marks on the child's pale skin. "This worthless little brat belongs to me according to a signed contract with New York State, and she's got a mountain of chores waiting for her back at the facility. 3 hours of missing work means 3 full days of extra punishment in the basement storage room." Emma's small body went completely rigid with terror at Patterson's words. Richard didn't understand the coded language that foster children learned to interpret for survival, but Emma knew exactly what extra punishment meant. No food for 3 days straight and sleeping alone in the freezing basement storage room where rusty pipes dripped ice-cold water all night long and rats scurried through the darkness, where children's desperate cries were muffled by thick concrete walls, and no one ever came to help, no matter how much you screamed or begged. "No," Marcus said suddenly, his voice stronger and more determined than it had been in years, his blue eyes blazing with protective fury. "Emma stays here with Papa and me. She's my best friend, and she makes the scary thoughts go away. You can't take her back to that terrible place." Patterson's cruel laugh was harsh and bitter, like the sound of breaking glass mixed with poison. "Your friend? Oh, that's rich. Boy, this little rat has been nothing but trouble and heartache since the day she arrived at my facility 3 years ago. You want to know what kind of friend she really is? Ask her about what happened with the last family that tried to adopt her, the Henderson family. Go ahead, ask sweet little Emma what she did to make them send her back within a single week, begging me to take her off their hands permanently." Emma's face crumpled with shame and devastating pain, and Richard watched in horror as something beautiful and hopeful died behind her dark eyes. Whatever had happened with the mysterious Henderson family, it was clearly a wound that had never properly healed, a source of guilt and self-hatred that Emma carried like a lead weight in her small chest. "I don't need to ask her anything," Richard said firmly, stepping protectively between Patterson and the children, his imposing 6-foot frame casting a long shadow over the cruel woman. "What I need is for you to remove yourself from my private property immediately, while I contact my legal team about initiating emergency custody procedures through the proper channels." Patterson's small, pig-like eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction as she played her trump card. "Your fancy lawyers can't help you this time, Mr. Billionaire. I've got an ironclad signed contract with New York State, and Emma Rodriguez is my legal responsibility until she turns 18 years old. That's 11 long years from now, and there's not a damn thing you or anyone else can do to change that fact." As if to emphasize her complete control over Emma's fate, she yanked the terrified child roughly toward the door with brutal force. Marcus's desperate, heartbroken scream shattered the mansion's peaceful atmosphere. But this time, no amount of gentle humming could fix what was being violently torn apart. The New York City Department of Children and Family Services building buzzed with the controlled chaos of overworked social workers, desperate families, and lost children moving through a system that seemed designed more for processing paperwork than protecting vulnerable lives. Richard Wellington sat uncomfortably in a scratched plastic chair that had probably cost less than his morning coffee. His immaculate $1,000 Tom Ford suit looking absurdly out of place among the peeling paint, flickering fluorescent lights, and the general atmosphere of bureaucratic despair that permeated every corner of the underfunded building. Across the metal desk that looked like a relic from the 1970s, caseworker Janet Mills shuffled through Emma's alarmingly thick file with the bone-deep weariness of someone who had witnessed too much human misery and had long since stopped believing that the system could actually help the children it claimed to protect. Janet was in her 40s, with prematurely grey hair and kind eyes that held the accumulated sadness of 1,000 broken families and failed interventions. "Mr. Wellington," Janet said, her voice professionally neutral but tinged with genuine sympathy, "I can certainly understand your personal interest in Miss Rodriguez's welfare, especially given the remarkable breakthrough she achieved with your son yesterday. However, I must be completely honest with you. Emma's situation is far more complicated and troubling than you might realize, and her placement history raises some very serious red flags that cannot be ignored." Richard's jaw clenched with growing frustration and dread. "What kind of red flags are we talking about, Miss Mills? What could possibly be so serious about a 7-year-old child who showed nothing but kindness and extraordinary empathy toward my son?" Janet hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with what she was about to reveal, her fingers drumming nervously on the desk as she struggled with the ethical implications of sharing confidential information. "She's been returned by 3 separate potential adoptive families in the past 2 years, Mr. Wellington. Each time, the families filed formal complaints with our department citing aggressive behavior, pathological lying, property destruction, and other deeply concerning incidents that suggest possible psychological disturbance." Richard felt the world tilt slightly beneath him, as if the ground he'd thought was solid had suddenly revealed itself to be quicksand. "What kind of other incidents?" "I need specifics, Miss Mills. This doesn't match anything I observed about Emma's character or behavior." Janet opened the file to a section marked with red tabs, indicating the most serious cases. The Henderson family, they were her most recent placement attempt 6 months ago, claimed that Emma deliberately tried to poison their 5-year-old biological daughter, Chloe, by putting drain cleaner in her apple juice. When directly confronted about the incident by both the parents and investigating officers, Emma denied any involvement completely, but the physical evidence was quite substantial and disturbing. Richard's blood ran cold, his mind reeling as he tried to reconcile this horrific accusation with the gentle, intuitive child who had brought his son back from the brink of despair. That's impossible. There has to be some kind of mistake or misunderstanding. The Emma I met yesterday could never harm another child. She has too much empathy, too much understanding of pain and suffering. I understand your disbelief, Mr. Wellington. Truly I do, Janet continued, her voice growing softer with genuine regret. But there are also reports from the Morrison family before that, claiming Emma set fire to their garden shed and killed their family cat, and from the Williams family before them, allegations of theft and deliberate destruction of family heirlooms. Each incident escalated in severity, and each family was absolutely convinced of her guilt despite her consistent denials. The room seemed to spin around Richard as he absorbed this devastating information. Could he have been so completely wrong about Emma? Could his desperate desire to help his son have blinded him to warning signs that trained professionals had documented? But even as doubt crept into his mind, he couldn't forget the miracle he'd witnessed, the instant connection, the perfect understanding, the way Marcus had smiled for the first time in years. I would like to speak with Emma directly about these allegations, Richard said carefully, his voice betraying none of the turmoil raging in his heart. I think she deserves the chance to tell her side of these stories. Janet's expression grew even more sympathetic and regretful. I'm afraid that's not possible at this time, Mr. Wellington. Following yesterday's incident at your home, Mrs. Patterson felt it necessary to place Emma in temporary disciplinary isolation for running away without permission. She's currently being held in the facility's secure wing until further notice. The words hit Richard like a series of physical blows to his chest. While he had been sitting in lawyers' offices and government buildings trying to navigate the legal system, Emma was being punished for the simple act of showing kindness to his son. The image of that beautiful, brave little girl locked away somewhere dark and lonely made his heart ache with helpless rage. However, Janet continued, there might be another option available to you, assuming you're serious about your commitment to helping both children. Our records clearly show that Marcus has demonstrated remarkable improvement since his encounter with Emma. The first significant progress in years, according to your own reports. If you were willing to consider becoming a certified therapeutic foster family, specifically trained to handle children with complex behavioral issues, we might be able to arrange closely supervised visits between Marcus and Emma while we work toward a more permanent solution. Richard leaned forward eagerly, hope flickering back to life in his chest. How long would that certification process take? What would be required? 6 to 8 months minimum, Janet replied, crushing his hopes as quickly as they had risen. You would need to pass extensive background checks, undergo multiple home studies, complete 60 hours of specialized training courses, and demonstrate your ability to handle crisis situations involving potentially dangerous children. The state doesn't take chances with placements involving children who have documented histories of violence. 6 to 8 months. Richard closed his eyes, trying to imagine Emma surviving that long in Patterson's cruel system, her remarkable spirit potentially broken beyond any hope of repair. He thought of his son's first real smile in 2 years, of the way Emma's presence had brought light and hope back into their devastatingly dark world. The basement storage room at Sunshine Foster Care smelled of mildew, despair, and broken dreams. a concrete tomb where unwanted children were sent to disappear from the world above. Emma sat on a paper-thin mattress in the corner, her small arms wrapped tightly around her knees as freezing water dripped steadily from the rusted overhead pipes, each drop echoing through the darkness like a countdown to hopelessness. She had been imprisoned here for 3 endless days now, surviving on nothing but stale bread crusts and lukewarm water. But the physical discomfort was absolutely nothing compared to the devastating ache in her chest where hope used to live. Through the small, filthy window near the ceiling, barely larger than a shoebox, Emma could see the other foster children playing in the tiny, fenced courtyard above, their distant laughter muffled by thick concrete walls that had been specifically designed to muffle screams and contain suffering. She wondered constantly if Marcus was okay, if he had started screaming again without her there to sing him calm, if Mr. Wellington had already forgotten about the strange little girl who had briefly entered their perfect, wealthy world like a ghost from another universe. Mrs. Patterson had made sure to tell Emma exactly what would happen to any child who dared to dream above their station weeks in this freezing basement, followed by transfer to a state institution where she would disappear completely into the system's darkest corners, just another file number in a forgotten cabinet. The message was crystal clear. Know your place, accept your worthlessness, and never ever believe that someone like Richard Wellington could actually want someone like her. The basement door creaked open with a sound like breaking bones, and Emma's heart seized with familiar terror. Mrs. Patterson only came down here when she wanted to deliver her cruelest psychological punishments, to break spirits that showed any sign of resilience or hope. But instead of Patterson's hulking, threatening frame filling the doorway, a slight figure slipped silently through the opening like a shadow seeking refuge. "Sophie?" Emma whispered, recognizing 10-year-old Sophie Chen, who had arrived at Sunshine Foster Care just 6 weeks ago after her immigrant grandmother could no longer care for her. Sophie was one of the quiet ones, the children who had learned to become completely invisible as their primary survival strategy, moving through the facility like ghosts to avoid attracting Patterson's violent attention. Sophie moved carefully down the concrete stairs, her bare feet making no sound as she clutched a small bundle in her trembling hands. She was one of the smartest children at the facility, able to read and write in 3 languages. But intelligence was more of a curse than a blessing in a place designed to crush hope and ambition. Something about Emma's story had reached her, though, penetrating the protective shell she had built around her heart. "I brought you some real food," Sophie whispered urgently, unwrapping half a peanut butter sandwich and a bruised apple she had saved from dinner by hiding them in her pillowcase and going hungry herself. "And I brought you something else, something very important that might change everything." She handed Emma a crumpled piece of paper, a child's drawing done in bright crayon colors that seemed to glow like a rainbow in the basement's gray darkness. It showed a little girl with dark hair standing between a tall man in a business suit and a boy in a wheelchair, all 3 of them smiling radiantly under a brilliant rainbow that stretched across the entire page. "Marcus drew this?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she studied the crude but deeply heartfelt artwork, tracing the careful lines with her finger as tears began flowing down her cheeks. "His daddy brought it here this morning," Sophie explained in hushed tones, glancing nervously at the stairs. "Mrs. Patterson wouldn't let him see you. She said you were being punished for ungrateful behavior and couldn't have visitors, but she couldn't stop him from leaving this picture. There's writing on the back, Emma. Important writing." Emma flipped the paper over with trembling hands, her heart hammering against her ribs as she struggled to read the carefully printed words in the dim light filtering through the tiny window. "Dear Emma, Marcus misses you more than words can say, and so do I. We are working very hard with lawyers and social workers to bring you home where you belong with us. Please don't give up hope, no matter what anyone tells you. You are wanted, you are loved, and you are worth fighting for. Richard Wellington. For the first time in 3 days of crushing despair, Emma smiled through her tears. Home. He had called the Wellington mansion home, and he had called her family. The words, "You are wanted, you are loved, and you are worth fighting for," echoed in her mind like a prayer, like a promise, like the first light of dawn after the longest, darkest night of her young life. But as heavy footsteps thundered down the basement stairs with the force of an approaching avalanche, Emma quickly hid the precious drawing in her worn shoe, pressing it against her foot like a secret talisman. Mrs. Patterson's massive bulk filled the doorway completely, blocking out what little light filtered down from above, her face flushed with rage and malicious anticipation. "Sophie Chen, get your worthless hide upstairs this instant before I decide you need some basement time too," Patterson roared, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "And you ungrateful little parasite," she pointed at Emma with a thick, accusing finger. "Clean yourself up right now. You have a very special visitor waiting upstairs, and you're going to tell Mr. High and Mighty Wellington exactly why you don't deserve his charity, exactly why you're nothing but damaged goods that no decent family could ever want." As Emma climbed the stairs on legs, shaking with fear and anticipation, she felt Marcus's drawing pressed against her foot like a secret promise of love and belonging. Whatever Patterson forced her to say, whatever lies she was commanded to tell, whatever cruelties she was ordered to perform, Emma would hold on to those precious words. You are wanted, you are loved, and you are worth fighting for. The revelation that would change everything forever was just moments away, waiting at the top of those concrete stairs. Emma's bare feet touched the cold linoleum floor of Sunshine Foster Care's main office as Mrs. Patterson shoved her roughly through the doorway. Richard Wellington stood by the grimy window, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the institutional surroundings, but his face showed the toll of 3 sleepless nights, worrying about the remarkable child who had given him back his son. "Here she is," Patterson sneered, her meaty hand gripping Emma's thin shoulder like a vice. "Tell Mr. Wellington the truth about what you really are, you little liar. Tell him about the Henderson girl you tried to poison." Emma's dark eyes met Richard's, and he saw something that broke his heart. Not guilt or deception, but pure, devastating fear. The kind of terror that comes from being powerless in a world controlled by cruel adults. "I didn't hurt Chloe," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "I would never hurt another kid. Never." Patterson's cruel laugh filled the room. "Lying again. The drain cleaner was in the juice box, and you were the only one who had access to it. The Hendersons have the police report to prove it." Richard knelt down to Emma's eye level, ignoring Patterson's presence entirely. Something about the child's expression, the way she held herself, reminded him of his late wife, Sarah, that same quiet strength in the face of injustice. "Emma," he said softly, "can you tell me what really happened that day?" Emma's lips trembled as she looked between Richard's kind face and Patterson's threatening glare. Chloe's big brother Jake was mean to her all the time. He put the bad stuff in her juice to scare her, but then when she got sick, he said it was me. Nobody believed me because I'm just a foster kid and he's their real son. The truth hit Richard like a physical blow. A jealous brother framing the foster child. It made perfect sense, and it explained Emma's consistent denials, despite the evidence. "That's enough," Patterson barked. "More lies from a disturbed child. Mr. Wellington, I've contacted the state institution." "Emma will be transferred there tomorrow for intensive psychological evaluation." Richard stood slowly, his business instincts kicking into high gear. "Mrs. Patterson, I think we need to discuss this situation more thoroughly. Perhaps we could step outside for a private conversation." As they moved toward the hallway, Emma caught Richard's eye one last time. She mouthed two words that would haunt him forever. Save Marcus. Even facing her own destruction, she was still thinking about protecting his son. The confrontation in the hallway was unlike anything Mrs. Patterson had experienced in her 23 years of running Sunshine Foster Care. Richard Wellington didn't raise his voice or make threats. Instead, he spoke in the quiet, controlled tone that had made him millions in Manhattan real estate. The voice that meant someone was about to lose everything they thought they owned. "Dolores," he said, using her first name with calculated familiarity, "I've spent the last 3 days researching your operation very thoroughly. Federal funding records, state inspection reports, financial audits. Very interesting reading." Patterson's face went pale. "What are you implying, Wellington?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts." Richard pulled out his phone and scrolled through a document. "Last year alone, your facility received $2, $3 million in federal funding for the care of 42 children. Yet your grocery receipts show food purchases that wouldn't adequately feed 15 children. Where did that money go, Dolores?" The older woman's hands began to shake. "You can't prove anything. I run a tight operation here." "Oh, but I can prove everything. My investigators are very thorough." Richard's smile was cold as winter. "The basement storage room where you keep Emma? That violates 17 different child safety codes. The lack of adequate heating, medical care, educational resources. Shall I continue?" Patterson tried to bluster, but her voice cracked. "You think your money can buy anything?" "My money already has bought something very important," Richard interrupted. "A team of federal investigators who are very interested in facilities that abuse children while stealing taxpayer funds. They'll be here tomorrow morning with warrants." The blood drained completely from Patterson's face. "What do you want?" "Emma Rodriguez. Full custody transfer today. You'll sign whatever documents my lawyers prepare, and in exchange, my investigators might find reasons to look elsewhere. Refuse, and by tomorrow evening, you'll be in federal prison where child abusers receive a very special kind of justice." Patterson's resistance crumbled like a house of cards. Through the office window, she could see Emma sitting alone, still clutching that ridiculous drawing. The kid had cost her everything. "Fine," she whispered, "but I want $50,000. Cash." Richard's laugh was genuinely amused. "Dolores, you're in no position to negotiate. You'll take nothing and be grateful that I'm allowing you to avoid prison." 20 minutes later, Emma Rodriguez was legally free from the nightmare that had trapped her for 3 years, walking toward Richard's Bentley with tears of disbelief streaming down her face. The Wellington mansion had been transformed in Emma's absence. Marcus's room now connected to a beautifully decorated bedroom that Maria had prepared with feminine touches. Soft purple walls, a bookshelf filled with children's classics, and a window seat overlooking the gardens where Emma could sit and read. But the most important change was Marcus himself. "Emma!" he called out as she entered the foyer, his wheelchair moving faster than she'd ever seen it. "Papa said you were coming home forever. Is it true? Are you really my sister now?" Emma knelt beside his chair, her heart so full she could barely speak. "If you want me to be your sister, then yes, forever and always." Richard watched from the doorway as the two children embraced, and for the first time since Sarah's death, he felt complete. But Emma's integration into their family would face challenges he hadn't anticipated. The next morning brought Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, Manhattan's most respected child psychologist, who had insisted on evaluating Emma before the adoption could be finalized. She was a stern woman in her 60s who had seen every form of childhood trauma imaginable. "Mr. Wellington," she began after her session with Emma, "this child has experienced profound loss and institutional abuse. Her psychological profile shows classic signs of attachment disorder and survival-based hypervigilance. Richard felt his heart sink. Are you saying she's dangerous? Quite the opposite. Emma Rodriguez is one of the most emotionally intelligent children I've ever encountered. Her ability to read and respond to Marcus's needs isn't learned behavior. It's intuitive empathy born from her own suffering. She understands pain because she's lived it. The doctor paused, choosing her words carefully. However, she's terrified that this happiness won't last. She's waiting for the moment when you decide she's too much trouble and send her back. Every child who's been repeatedly rejected develops this fear. How do we help her understand that will never happen? Time, patience, and consistency. Show her through actions, not words, that love doesn't have conditions. And Mr. Wellington, be prepared for her to test those boundaries. She needs to know that even at her worst moments, you won't abandon her. That afternoon, as if summoned by the doctor's warning, Emma's first test began. Richard found her in Marcus's room, both children surrounded by torn papers and broken crayons, tears streaming down both their faces. What happened here? He asked gently. I ruined everything, Emma sobbed. Marcus was drawing our family, and I got scared and tore it up because what if it's not real? What if tomorrow you decide you don't want me anymore? Richard knelt between them, pulling both children close. Emma, look at me. You are my daughter now. Marcus is your brother. This is your home, and nothing you could ever do would change that. But Emma's real test was just beginning. And the revelation came on a rainy Thursday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks after Emma's adoption was finalized. Detective Maria Santos from the NYPD's Crimes Against Children unit arrived at the Wellington mansion with news that would change everything they thought they knew about Emma's past. Mr. Wellington, Detective Santos began, settling into the living room while Emma and Marcus played upstairs. We've been investigating the allegations made against Emma Rodriguez by her former foster families. What we discovered is disturbing. Richard's blood ran cold. Please tell me she didn't actually hurt those children. She didn't hurt anyone, sir. Emma was the victim, not the perpetrator. Santos opened her file. The Henderson case? Jake Henderson, age 13, has confessed to poisoning his sister's juice and framing Emma. His parents discovered he'd been physically abusing Chloe for months, and when Emma started protecting the little girl, Jake decided to get rid of her. Richard felt the room spin. And the other families? The Morrison family's biological son started the fire and killed the cat. When his parents caught him, he blamed Emma. The Williams family? Their teenage daughter was stealing and selling family heirlooms to buy drugs. Again, Emma became the convenient scapegoat. But why didn't Emma defend herself? Why didn't she tell anyone the truth? Santos's expression grew sad. Because she's 7 years old, and she learned that adults don't believe foster children over biological children. Each time she told the truth and wasn't believed, she stopped trying. She accepted that she would always be blamed for things she didn't do. The detective paused, her voice growing harder. There's more, Mr. Wellington. Mrs. Patterson knew. She knew Emma was innocent in every case, but she was receiving bonus payments from the state for housing difficult children. Keeping Emma labeled as problematic was profitable. Richard's hands clenched into fists. How long has this been going on? 3 years, since Emma first entered the system. She's been a scapegoat for other children's crimes, punished for sins she never committed, and labeled as dangerous when she's actually been trying to protect younger kids. Upstairs, Emma appeared at the top of the staircase, having heard voices. She looked down at the police detective and immediately assumed the worst. They were coming to take her away again. "Papa," she called out, her voice small and terrified. "Did I do something wrong?" Richard looked up at his daughter, and felt his heart break for every injustice she'd endured. "No, sweetheart, come down here. Detective Santos has something very important to tell you." As Emma descended the stairs on trembling legs, Richard realized that the biggest challenge wasn't behind them. It was helping Emma understand that she deserved happiness, that she wasn't cursed, that love could actually last. The truth would set her free, but first it would shatter everything she believed about herself. Emma sat curled in Richard's arms on the living room sofa, her small body shaking as Detective Santos gently explained the truth about her past. Marcus had wheeled his chair close, holding his sister's hand, as each revelation unfolded like a nightmare finally ending. "Emma," Detective Santos said softly, "you were never the bad kid. You were never the problem. Every single family that sent you back was protecting their own biological children who had blamed you for their mistakes." "But I must have done something wrong," Emma whispered, years of programmed shame making her voice barely audible. "Otherwise, why did everyone always believe I was bad?" Richard tightened his embrace. "Because adults made terrible mistakes, sweetheart. Because the system that was supposed to protect you failed you completely." Detective Santos continued, "The Henderson family wants to apologize to you personally. Jake is in counseling now, getting help for his problems. His parents realize they almost destroyed an innocent child's life." Emma looked up at Richard with confusion and wonder. "So I'm not broken? I'm not the kind of kid that families give back?" "You are perfect exactly as you are," Richard said firmly. "You're brave and kind, and you have the most beautiful heart I've ever known. Any family would be lucky to have you, but you're ours now. Forever." Marcus squeezed her hand. "Emma, you saved me from the scary feelings in my head. You're like a superhero, but better because you're real, and you're my sister." Detective Santos smiled as she packed up her files. "There's one more thing, Emma. Mrs. Patterson has been arrested on federal charges of child abuse and fraud. She'll never hurt another child again. And the state wants to give you a formal apology and compensation for what you endured." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing 3 years of pain and confusion suddenly making sense. "So, when I told the truth, I really was telling the truth." "Always," Richard said. "Your truth was always real. The adults around you just weren't ready to hear it." That evening, as Richard tucked both children into their beds, Emma asked the question that had haunted her for years. "Papa, what if the happy feelings go away? What if I wake up tomorrow and this was all just a dream?" Richard sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. "Emma, I can't promise that life will always be easy. Sad things happen sometimes, even to families who love each other. But I can promise you this: no matter what happens, no matter what challenges we face, you will always be my daughter, and Marcus will always be your brother. Love doesn't disappear just because life gets difficult. Even if I make mistakes, even if I mess up sometimes." "Especially then," Richard smiled. "That's when families love each other the most, during the messy, imperfect, mistake-filled moments. That's what makes us family." For the first time in 3 years, Emma fell asleep without fear, surrounded by love that had no conditions and belonging that couldn't be taken away. But their story was far from over. The biggest miracle was yet to come. 6 months later, the Wellington mansion buzzed with excitement as friends and family gathered for a celebration that no one could have imagined a year earlier. Emma Rodriguez Wellington stood in front of the mirror in her beautiful bedroom, adjusting the purple dress that Maria had helped her pick out for this special day. "Emma," Marcus called from downstairs, his voice filled with joy that had become his normal tone since his sister's arrival. "Everyone's here. Dr. Hartwell, Detective Santos, even some kids from my new school." Emma smiled at her reflection. The frightened, hollow-eyed child who had approached a screaming boy in a restaurant 6 months ago was gone. In her place stood a confident, radiant little girl who knew she was loved unconditionally. Dr. Hartwell had been right about Emma's testing phase. For 2 months, she had pushed every boundary, broken rules, and waited for Richard to give up on her. But every time she acted out, he responded with patience and love. Every time she expected rejection, she found acceptance. Slowly, the terrified walls around her heart had crumbled. The celebration downstairs was for multiple miracles. Emma's official adoption had been finalized that morning, making her legally and permanently Emma Rodriguez Wellington. But there was more. Marcus had made breakthrough after breakthrough. His new school, designed specifically for children with autism, reported that he was thriving socially and academically. His physical therapy had progressed so well that doctors were optimistic about him eventually walking again with assistance. "Papa," Emma said as she entered the living room where Richard was greeting guests, "I have something to tell everyone." The room fell quiet as this remarkable child who had taught them all about resilience and love stepped forward. "6 months ago, I was just a foster kid that nobody wanted," Emma began, her clear voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I thought I was broken, that there was something wrong with me that made families give me back." Richard's eyes filled with tears as he watched his daughter's courage. "But I learned something important," Emma continued. "Sometimes, when bad things happen to you, it's not because you're bad. Sometimes, it's because the world is still learning how to be better. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, you find people who see past all the scary, sad stuff and love you anyway." She turned to Richard and Marcus. "I found my family not because I was perfect, but because they were perfect for me. Marcus needed someone who understood his kind of different, and I needed people who could love all my broken pieces." Marcus wheeled over to his sister's side. "Emma taught me that being different isn't scary if you have someone who gets it. She made my autism feel like a superpower instead of a punishment." Richard stepped forward, placing his hands on both children's shoulders. "A year ago, I thought my family was finished. I thought Marcus and I would just survive together, getting by day after day. Emma didn't just save my son. She completed our family in ways I didn't even know we were missing." Detective Santos wiped her eyes as she watched the three of them together. Dr. Hartwell smiled with professional satisfaction mixed with personal joy. Even hardened social workers in the room found themselves emotional. As the celebration continued into the evening, Emma pulled Richard aside. "Papa, I want to do something when I grow up." "What's that, sweetheart?" "I want to help other kids like me. Kids who think they're broken, but really just need someone to believe in them. Kids who need families to find them." Richard knelt down to her level, just as he had that first day in Patterson's office. "Emma, I think that's the most beautiful dream anyone could have, and I think you're going to change the world." That night, as Richard tucked both children into their beds, he realized that Emma's story wasn't just about an orphan finding a family. It was about broken people healing each other, about love conquering systems designed to fail vulnerable children, and about the miraculous power of believing in someone when they can't believe in themselves. Emma Rodriguez Wellington fell asleep that night not as a foster child waiting for rejection, but as a beloved daughter dreaming of the day she could help other lost children find their way home. And in the room next door, Marcus slept peacefully, without nightmares, for the first time since his accident, protected by the love of the sister who had taught him that being different was just another way of being perfectly himself. The Wellington family was complete. Their love story, a testament to the truth that families aren't just born. Sometimes they're chosen, fought for, and built from the broken pieces of individual hearts, learning to beat as one.